I want to begin by welcoming everyone on this important session around legal judgment, some of the legal judgments. In fact, in the past 6 years, ever since December 2013, ever since this law has been cleared and companies have started understanding how to implement and how to adapt the guidelines around this law, there are so many cases that have gone to the higher courts, which have provided not just clarification on some of the ambiguities that already existed in the legal text, but also have provided the practical aspects of understanding the implementation of those guidelines. And that has been the main reason why we want to make sure that we cover each and every judgment which has been able to help us as practitioners understand this law a little more and go a little deeper or closer to what exactly was the primary and the larger objective that this law has looked at achieving for women who are associated with the workplace, be it be it when it comes to understanding what the companies and the management are required to do, or the responsibility and the role and the profile of the external member, or we talk about how certain principles that IC is required to function under, the principles of natural justice, how they actually manifest themselves when we are dealing with investigations and accepting complaints and documentation and so many facets around it. So in today's discussion, we will be looking at four, right, Suruchi? Four
Yes, that's
legal
right.
judgments.
Yeah.
And this session is actually an extension or a small aspects of what we also cover in our 3 months long executive certificate program. Anybody who wants to understand about it can always reach out to us later. That's not the primary focus here. The primary focus are the legal judgments, and let's make sure that by the time we are done with today's session, we have a little better and clearer understanding of what is expected of us as Posh practitioners and advisors for the companies.
Yeah.
So, Suruchi, over to you.
Thank you. So hello, everybody. Good evening. And thank you for joining us today for this, 1 hour quick session on a couple of judgments that we for today have identified, which might be useful for you to know. There are a few topics which we have kept in mind for today, but these are not the only judgments which are there, of course. And we have identified few high court judgments for you. Ranging from the whole concept of sexual harassment to who comes on the committee, to how the committee takes up these complaints and what does it need to apply, and especially this whole thing about today where we are in a lockdown situation. We are all working from home today. Everybody is taking these sessions and all these. They all are on their phones. They're all on their social messaging services, and they're taking. Does that count as a workplace? Interestingly, a very old judgment, in fact, already envisaged a situation where, work would be happening over technology, over information technology. So that's one of the judgments that we have gotten out for you today also to get a glimpse at. And of course, once we are, through with these judgments, once we take you through it, we'll be happy to take your questions. Pallavi, I'll share my screen now.
Yes, please.
Not able to. Okay.
Pallavi, you will have to allow screen share.
Yeah.
Just a minute. Yeah,
yep, that's fine. Yes. All right. So can everybody see the screen clear?
Yes, I can.
Great. So let's begin our session today. We, of course, just to refresh our memory, In fact, the first very judgment to set out certain guidelines, even pertaining to dealing with the sexual harassment at workplace, was Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan, where the Supreme Court in 1997 understood that the sexual harassment is violative of fundamental rights of women, violative of her right to be in a workplace which is dignified, violative of her right to work in a place with safety and security. So in this case, the Supreme Court set out certain guidelines called the Vishakha guidelines, and in fact also mentioned that these guidelines will remain binding upon establishments till a proper law is enacted. And just to give a very brief overview about the guidelines spoke about what is sexual harassment. It actually also asked companies to form a complaints committee and also put in measures to prevent such instances from happening. It's only in December 2013 was the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, Redressal Act of 2013 was brought into force. However, even though there have been it has been 7 years since the act has been in place, 6.5 actually, it still is not immune to any challenges, as to the scope of it has been interpreted continuously by the courts prior to the act coming in and even after the act coming in. The some things like what is sexual harassment, what about the committee, have always been interpreted. So let's go on to our first case, which we have identified today for our session, is the test of a reasonable woman. We are seeing the case of Punita Keswadi versus Union of India, which was before the High Court of Delhi and was decided in 2010. In this case, Punita Keswadi was an MBBS graduate and MS graduate, and she joined the school officer at the Safdarjung Hospital in 2007. She was initially working under a different department, and then suddenly she was shifted to the department of the perpetrator, in which the person against whom she eventually complained, Dr. KPS Malik. As per the petitioner in this case, what happened was she was a victim of a hostile working environment, where we saw that the doctor KPS Malik, he took a lot of undue advantage of her husband being outside the station, outside Delhi. He used to call her repeatedly, ask her to assist him in surgeries where she was not even required to, and apparently, allegedly, according to her, he came very close to her in one of the time when the operation was going on and tried to touch her. Because of this environment that got created at the hospital, she decided to leave that pool job and she went to Rohtak as a lecturer on a contract basis. But because of her children were very young and they were in Delhi, she had to move back to Safdarjung Hospital. But after she moved back to the hospital, things went even further downhill. She was in fact subjected to a lot of unfair behavior from Dr. Malik, in which in a lot of instances, in fact, he questioned her methodologies and he questioned her medical treatments. And in a lot of internal memorandums, he in fact asked the management to terminate her from services. She was also given a very rude memorandum from him saying that you have indulged in medical negligence and you should educate yourself, and you should seek advice from seniors whenever you are handling patients which you don't think you can handle yourself. Whereas the petitioner in this case maintained that her treatment was proper. Whatever she gave was in fact working for the patient, and the patient in fact left within the hospital properly from within the hospital after 6 days. After a long period of bearing all of this, she finally filed a complaint of sexual harassment and she sought transfer out of the establishment. She also filed a complaint with the Delhi Commission of Women, and in fact, as soon as her complaints got filed, as a counterblast, Dr. Malik filed complaints against her for unethical conduct as a doctor, where he said that she was using a fake designation to tell people that, and even in publications, to tell people she was the head of the department, whereas she wasn't the head of the department. And because of these counter complaints and these complaints that she had filed, the petitioner was finally moved to Lady Hardinge Medical College, where she was the assistant over there. The internal committee, in fact, of Sadarjung Hospital, because of these complaints and these counter complaints that were there, suggested the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare that a separate team, an independent team, may be formed of external experts to look into these complaints. And the team, in fact, one of the contentions which was raised by the petitioner in this case was that the head of the team, the external experts team, were while they were all independent, the head was not in fact senior to this Dr. Malik. So there was a likelihood of this the head of the team getting influenced by the fact that the complaint was against Dr. Malik. Not surprisingly, the team did not find Dr. guilty, as they said that they did not get any evidence regarding him touching her. They said that she did not cooperate with the whole proceedings. They were not even the same department, so they said that it is unlikely for Dr. Malik to have, in fact, sexually harassed her. This report was found to be, as per the petitioner, found to be unfair, and she appealed before the High Court. So let's see, what did the High Court hold? The High Court held very clearly that these instances of sexual harassment cannot be seen in isolation. Every instance, sexual harassment is a species of sex-based discrimination, and they need to be seen together over a prolonged period, which has led to a person filing the complaint. Every instance of sexual harassment has to be taken into account together and revisited. And the whole power equation between the perpetrator and the victim, in this case the petitioner, has to be looked at. As per the High Court, it held that the committee's view was very narrow and overlooked a lot of instances. By just saying that the doctor did not touch her, that does not mean that he did not create any instances other than that, what she alleged, other than that, which would have been discrimination and which would have led to creating a hostile working environment for her. This is where even the court, in fact, took a lot of inference from the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, what we call CEDAW, which led to a lot of changes in the laws of countries all across the world in dealing with sexual harassment. It said that use of abusive and abrasive language and a certain imputation of competence of a person only because the person is of certain gender are matters which would be covered under the expression of sex-based discrimination. In fact, the court said that all the language which was used by Dr. Malik, putting down, condescending tone, abusing the petitioner about her capabilities, her competency, was sex-based discrimination. In fact, it relied upon a lot of foreign laws to identify that these are practices or attitudes. One of the judgments of Supreme Court of Canada was relied upon, and it said that these are, whenever there is a discrimination on basis of sex, which is by way of the attitude of a person, is also something which is characteristic, to sexual harassment and sex-based discrimination. So it also relied upon one of these famous cases of U.S. Court of Appeal, Ellison versus Brady, in which the test of a reasonable woman was laid down. We have to see how an act or an instance of sexual harassment actually affects a person, and not what the intention was, or not how you think or one thinks that a certain behavior to be called as sexual harassment, it has to be a certain kind of behavior. It is not so. If a reasonable woman perceives a certain behavior to be sexual harassment, sex-based discrimination, then you have to take that into mind when you have to be adjudicating upon her complaint. In fact, the court went on further to say that harassment has to be seen from the victim's perspective. Any person, there's a difference in the way men perceive instances, and there's a difference in the way women perceive instances. Men tend to view certain forms as harmless social interactions, whereas women tend to find them harassing. So that is where a test of a reasonable woman comes into place, where we have to see it from her perspective rather than your knowledge and rather than your sensitivity to say think that no, but this is normal. It does not seem to be sexual harassment. This is where the court went on to say that it's not that she's a hypersensitive employee. You cannot call her that. If the condition of her work has become sufficiently severe or pervasive to create an abusive working environment, then it would fall within the category of sexual harassment. Therefore, the High Court, in fact, sent the investigation back to the inquiry committee and told it to be constituted properly and constitution should be done within 4 weeks and finish the inquiry within a certain period of time. So this was the decision of the court. Now let's see, this is something that we always discuss in slides like, in presentations like ours, as to what constitutes a sexual harassment. Any unwanted, unwelcome physical contact or advances, demand for or request for sexual favors, making sexually colored remarks, showing pornography or sharing such sexual gestures. They are plain vanilla instances of sexual harassment, which we see even laid down under the Act. It is very easy to say that these are sexual harassment. However, there are certain other instances also, which if happening would be also sexual harassment. Like we saw in this case also, abusive language, bullying or hostility, especially subjected to a specific gender, disrespectful behavior, maternity-related questions, which are just, crossing the boundaries of, a conduct between colleagues, discrimination, unfair treatment, stereotyping based upon gender, smutty jokes or comments, persistent questions about personal life and remarks, offensive, intrusive phone calls, messages, WhatsApp, stalking, staring, leering, any other physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct would be sexual harassment. Again, just to stress and take back what we saw from the judgment, it's action plus intent plus perception. In fact, perception differs by the diversity of all of us. We are all brought up in a separate environment. We all have separate sensitivities. We all have separate experiences, what we would call as harmless or harassing behavior. So these are the things that we need to keep in mind. These are the things that got enunciated, in fact, in this judgment.
No, absolutely, Ruchi. If I may add certain things here. Meanwhile, I will request you then, now that I have made you the host, please check if there are people in the waiting room.
Yeah, I'll do that.
So one of the issues that this actually, this judgment highlights is the main confusion around two areas. One, every time that we have conducted, or I'm sure as a lot of you might be conducting awareness sessions also, is the confusion that our audience has that what exactly constitutes as sexual harassment now, especially under this law. Because if we cannot even ask a personal question to a colleague, or if we cannot use any abusive language, or if we cannot even reprimand a female colleague of ours in a harsh language, is it going to all be covered under the definition of workplace sexual harassment? And that is precisely the distinction that everybody needs to make, and as difficult as it may be to explain to people, one of the context here to acknowledge is that anything, any comment, any action, any behavior, verbal, non-verbal, which damages or which causes as a potential harm to a female's entry in that work environment, or their growth, or their continuity. So one small example, and Suruchi, please feel free to correct me, is one of the common examples that we tell people is that you can always reprimand somebody, right? If you have to speak to somebody, irrespective of the gender, the feedback should be associated with their work. And the feedback is never gender oriented. But the minute your feedback has any component which is gender related, or which is related to the sex that that person belongs to, that is when it becomes problematic. And that is when, as an internal committee or as an external member on that committee, you need to consider that particular behavior as a problematic behavior under the workplace sexual harassment. So the
Absolutely.
question around maternity, the disrespectful behavior, ignoring, not inviting that specific individual into team outings. Yes, all of us at the face front can look at them as a very casual behavior, which any human group can actually, showcase. But if any extension is happening with the lens of the gender, or any comment, any discrimination is happening because of that person's gender and sex, that is when this law gets activated.
Yes. Right, Pallavi.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for this. So the next one that we are covering is quite a crucial case even for today's time. It's about the extent of the workplace. Very interesting case. It's about Saurabh Kumar Malik versus the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Again, a Delhi High Court judgment, in fact, of 2008. In this, it's very interesting to note the relationship, in fact, between the complainant and the respondent. They both were employees of the Indian Audit and Account Service. They both held a position of director. The respondent over here held the position of director administration, as in the petitioner in this case, and the complainant, the original complainant of the sexual harassment complaint, held the position of director training. While they had the same designation, in fact, the complainant over here, the one who was sexually harassed, was senior officer to the person who harassed her. And they both were, in fact, at the academy, the National Academy of Accounts and Audit, and they were given residential quarters at the academy itself. So what happened over here was sometime in 2007, in March 2007, they all had gone, the petitioner, the senior officer, the lady officer in question over here, they all had gone with their colleagues and other officers for official dinner to a hotel nearby. And they returned a little later in the night back to the academy where all the officers were dropped to their residential buildings. The petitioner and the senior officer over here happen to be living in the same building, different floors. In this case, the petitioner, in fact, followed the senior officer to her room, forcibly entered her room. When she opened the door, she forcibly entered her room. He expressed his love for her. He said, in fact, in the judgment, it's written, "I want you." Or he kept on saying repeatedly. He held her wrist and he made her sit down. When she pushed him away, she pushed him out of the room. She in fact even said that you are insulting me by this behavior. You get out from this room. And he stood outside the room and she locked the door also, wanting to speak to her, kept on consistently knocking. In fact, in this case, she had to call some of the other officers to come to take this petitioner away. After this incident happened, immediately on the next day, she filed an FIR against the petitioner. And soon thereafter, within the second week of April, around 12th of April, she filed a formal complaint of sexual harassment. Because of the FIR, the petitioner was suspended from the duties, and in fact, he later informed that he is contesting these proceedings because the proceedings were they could not have been done because of the fact that it was not a workplace, and B, that the FIR was pending along with the proceedings of sexual harassment. So he, while the proceedings were pending, in fact, he went to the administrative tribunal to get a stay on these proceedings pending the FIR investigation. His primary contention in all throughout, even in the tribunal, even when the matter went to the Delhi High Court, has been that he cannot be charged for sexual harassment at the workplace because the incident in question over here took place at the residence of the complainant, where he had entered her room. But the tribunal did not accept this whole thing, and it said that it is not necessary that the workplace is where the work is performed. Any extension of a place of work, especially in this case, it was an extension of the academy in the same complex, similar like a situation of a college which has a hostel attached to it. So in where a hostel or a mess where the employer, in fact, in this case, there was proximity to the workplace, there was full control over the residential quarters as well by the employer, because they decide who gets to stay there, who doesn't get to stay there. Full control over the management would be treated as an extension, as an expression of workplace. Because he did not agree with the tribunal's decision, he went to the High Court. And the High Court, in fact, held that a narrow, pedantic approach cannot be taken in defining the term workplace by just confining it to where work is done or what we call as office. In fact, the office complex is quite large. It would include within itself everything which is proximity to it, everything which is controlled by the employer, by the same employer who controls the office space. So this workplace definition was quite enhanced in this 2008 judgment. And in fact, how it applies today also is very interesting to note, is that the High Court especially took instance of computer and internet technology, where a person can interact or do business with another person while sitting in any other place. So by doing video conferences, exactly what we are doing today, this was already clarified by the High Court way back in 2008, that this is also a situation of a workplace. Similarly, like where we have home offices, we have a lot of startup cultures where CEOs run their offices from their residence, and if some employee of that CEO goes over there and gets sexually harassed, the CEO cannot evade its responsibility or liability by just saying that, but it was at my residence. That is not possible. That place is still his workplace, her workplace. So that residence also counts as a workplace. And this was what was clarified. This was what was amplified by the High Court in this matter. In fact, giving an example of educational institutions also, which have hostel accommodations which are provided to students, and even teachers sometimes even get those residential accommodations within those hostels. They also stay within those hostels. These hostels are within the college complex, and many a times even the teacher may work from the accommodation allotted to them. So they cannot, if a student goes over there and gets sexually harassed, it cannot be said that because they went to the residence, that means that it was never a workplace. So these illustrations which were given by the court way back are very interesting to note. Apart from the very interesting fact of this case was that the person again who complained was a senior officer to him, was very keen to understand that the definition of workplace was widened. Definition of the workplace was amplified for it. In fact, when this matter came before the High Court, the committee inquiry was still pending. So the High Court sent it back saying that you've come too soon, and you should go back to the inquiry committee and let the committee complete its investigation. And then if there are any other merits of the case which need to be challenged, they can be challenged. So this is what we saw from this decision of Saurabh Kumar Malik. And just to give you a quick recap of what our law today states as a definition of workplace is the government establishments, private establishments, hospitals, nursing homes, any sports institutes, stadiums, sport complexes, any place visited by the employee, including the transportation given to it, a dwelling place or a house, are all workplaces. And in fact, today, because we are all on internet technology, information technology on the internet, of doing video conferences and everything, all of that again, with our colleagues, with our employers, becomes a workplace.
In fact, that is what we do, right, Suruchi? The first thing that is crucial the minute as an external member or as a posh consultant that you start advising any organization, the first step is to sit down and clarify the definition of three things. Number one, actually four things. Number one, who exactly is considered as the employer?
Exactly.
Yeah. Because the minute you identify that, all your documentation will start getting framed around that only, from identifying who can be part of the committee to who should be nominating members for the committee and documenting and signing authorities and so on and so forth. Second thing is to make sure that you get the definition of the employee's right, because that judgment I don't think we are covering today, but it's very important to know that as per the definition of the law, who all can be considered as employees for this specific industry and for this specific company that I am going to be advising on. Do we have third party people on roll? Do we have interns on board? And so many other things. The next thing to identify is what all are the workplaces. And a very
Absolutely.
simple question to answer is where all are my employees, the one that I have identified, are engaging physically, virtually, and in any other extended mode. So do we throw parties? That means that we have to create provisions for the guidelines for the parties also. Do my people go for conferences? Then those are extended workplaces. Are my people working from remote locations? Where are they working from? Are they working out of coffee shops? Are they working out of co-working places? Are these my employees which are mobile and on ground? Are these my employees which are sitting in some other town somewhere as part of my call center or backend support? And where are these people, right? Where are they staying? One very good example which was here, we noticed the same thing in one of the companies that we were dealing with, wherein most of their employee base was actually coming from different parts of the country, and as part of the provisions they had given them housing arrangement also. So they had identified couple of service apartments and hostels for these people to stay, and it was also considered as part of the extended workplace because there was no reason for them to stay in that place until and unless these were recommended by that particular company. So, and then the fourth thing that you do is you identify the definition of sexual harassment for your organization.
Yes.
But that's another deeper and a very
Yes.
exhaustive level of conversation. But
Absolutely.
each company, depending on the industry and the kind of work that they are doing, the definitions need to be sorted out the minute the engagement starts with any organization. And as a posh practitioner, it's something which is very crucial to look into.
Yes. Right, Pallavi.
Yeah, I just wanted to make another point also that I think this judgment also provided a very important clarity, Suruchi, which a lot of IC members keep asking us that, and individuals also, that can we go to a higher court if we are not happy with the decision or with the way things are happening with an ongoing investigation of a specific committee. And when you mentioned about that, the petitioner had already gone to the higher court and they sent that person back.
Yes.
You wait for it, gives a lot of clarification and establishes the hierarchy that internal complaints committee or internal committees have in this whole thing. So I will request if you can just quickly capture that part again.
The one about the...
No, just the hierarchical part, because a complainant may want to go to the higher, court.
Of course.
Going investigation.
Yes. So, as per the law, once the IC gives its decision, it can be appealed against with the appellate authority under the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, if there is no appellate authority under the service rules. Usually, which is in the case of government organizations where the civil service rules code of conduct provides for higher appellate authorities. Pursuant to the appellate authority under the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, the matter can go towards the court and then towards the Supreme Court if it still has to be decided on a specific issue of law.
Yeah, and that's what we also tell people, that if you're not happy with an ongoing investigation, it's better to approach the employer with any concerns regarding it instead of reaching out to the higher court, because with precedents like this, we already know that the courts will wait for the first level of court, which is the internal committee, to come up with their decision. And then if you're not happy with it, then there is, of course, you can follow the steps and the guidance I've mentioned under the law.
Correct, because that is what, usually what's the stance in labor laws, wherever there is a proper adjudication mechanism in a specific subject, we have to explore that first and then go towards the higher authorities. Because if the disciplinary hearing, in this case, the internal committee hearings are going on and you in between go towards the higher authorities, there is not much challenge to it. The matter is still ongoing. It's possible what the result would come would be different from what you expect it to be. But on certain grounds or certain issues, you have to wait it out and then challenge them before the proper authorities. And in fact, what we have seen in these previous instances, especially in this instance, the FIR was filed at the same time the sexual harassment complaint was filed. So in fact, one of the challenges which was in this judgment also, while we have covered this judgment from a perspective of what is the definition and the extent of workplace, one of the challenges in this matter was also regarding whether the FIR proceedings can continue alongside the sexual harassment complaint, and the court held that yes, they can. They both are different proceedings. They both require different set of evidence, different category of evidence, whereas the criminal evidence has to be beyond reasonable doubt, and the evidence in a sexual harassment has to be on preponderance of probabilities. So there is no harm in any investigation of police ongoing with the investigation of sexual harassment complaint.
Great, great. Thanks.
Let's move on.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's move on to our third case, which is regarding the external member. So this is one of the most recent cases, and in fact, from High Court of Delhi, it also went to Supreme Court. It was challenged, although the Supreme Court also disposed of the appeal. This is Ruchika Singh Chhabra versus Air France India and others, decided on in 2018. Ruchika Singh was an employee of Air France India office, and she was designated as commercial assistant since 2001. She, in fact, suffered sexual harassment where Stanislaw Braun, who was a French national and was deputed to India as a marketing manager in 2013. She experienced a lot of instances of sexual advances from him, and even though she rebuffed those advances, he still kept on harassing her. And finally, in 2015, she complained regarding sexual harassment. Unfortunately, she was victimized quite badly in her organization by her senior employees. And sometime in 2017, she was manhandled by a group of senior employees who then forced her to resign from service. And and they threatened her, in fact, that if she wouldn't resign from service, they would terminate her and forfeit all her benefits and put some charges of misconduct on her. She was quite scared, and the same day she resigned. But while she resigned, she lodged an FIR on the same day. This was, in fact, she filed a complaint in 2015. While we saw that she resigned in 2017, her complaint was in 2015. One of the major contentions of her was regarding the whole IC constitution, which was completely incorrect, apparently. She received the data regarding the IC members 2 months after her filing of the complaint. She was informed about the internal committee members who were from the organization as well as the senior employer. With regards to the external member, the person happened to be a labor lawyer in Delhi, and he was also a member of the Employers Association of Delhi. Now, because of the whole fact that he was an Employers Association member, this perked up her ears, and she wanted clarification from the IC whether Air France is affiliated with the Employers Association to gauge the independence of this external member. She kept on repeatedly asking about this external member's whole presence in the committee, contending that it was all wrongly formed. The external member should have been from an NGO, and nothing that sort was informed to her. It was not clarified to her whether he was in conflict of interest, in fact, with Air France, because he happened to be an Employers Association member. And nothing was told to her by the IC, and no fresh IC was constituted, despite her raising repeated complaints regarding the constitution of the IC. And then finally, then the decision, she approached the single bench of the Delhi High Court, which was challenged by Air France, and they said that no, the Delhi High Court does not have jurisdiction to decide this complaint because their office was in Gurgaon. Also, the Delhi office was just on paper, but this again was challenged by her in appeal. So let's see, what did the court hold over here. Over here also, the court in fact asked Air France again repeatedly whether the external member in this case had experience dealing with sexual harassment or dealing with issues of women in general, or was he from NGO. And it specified that we have seen from Vishakha guidelines itself that a person who is a member of NGOs or associations committed to the cause of women, it has to be there in specific, in these internal committees to ensure that there is no possibility of undue pressure or influence from senior levels. Because if there is no independent member, there is a high probability of bias and of the decision not coming in favor. And if there is any conflict of interest, even more. the court relied upon the very famous case of Jaya Kodate versus Rashashan Tukraji Maharaj University, where it said that the NGO member is there in the IC to maintain an independent and impartial position in there, who will not be influenced by the management of the company. Especially in US Verma, one of the DPS case that we saw of 2009. In fact, it said that to ensure objectivity and neutrality of an inquiry, uh, completely insulated and isolated from any interference of an employer, you have to have a person who is totally independent. So in this case, in fact, it even noticed the fact that because she was asked to leave suddenly, the High Court said that it appears that there was bias in the proceedings because of this sudden termination, the sudden exit of this employee, and despite her asking repeatedly regarding her concerns with the ICC constitution, no comfort was given to her. She was not informed about anything about, and there was definitely no fairness in the inquiry. So the decision of the High Court was that the external member, because of Air France completely failing to justify why that person was there and whether that person had any conflict of interest with Air France, being a member of the Employers Association, the High Court said that the external member was not validly appointed, and whatever decision the IC had given finding there to be no case of sexual harassment was invalid and set aside, and the IC had to be reconstituted within 30 days to conduct its inquiry afresh. One of the contentions which was raised by Air France was that the law says that the person could be a labor lawyer, or a person could be an expert in labor law or service laws. However, that requirement is specific to a local committee member, to an external member appointed for the local committee. It's not for the internal committee. In fact, Section 4C2 of the POSH law gives the requirement for an external member for an internal committee. The person should be either from an NGO or from an association committed to the cause of women, or a person familiar with the issues of relating to sexual harassment. In the case that we just saw, in fact, while this person may be a labor lawyer and very well renowned, that person had nothing to substantiate the fact that this person was in fact associated with causes of women or familiar with the issues of sexual harassment. There, the court held that this person was not found fit to be an external member.
Yeah, and additional things to notice, because see, the BEAR Act is so thin, and it's expecting that people will understand the intent. When we say independent external member, the whole point of having an independent external member is, one, there should be no conflict of interest. We see
Absolutely.
various organizations where the ICC composition stands faulty because the external members are directly, either in a personal association manner or in a professional association manner, do have invested or do have an investment in the success or failure of that specific organization. And these kind of ICs or these committee constitutions actually do not comply with the intended guideline of the law. And in addition to that, the expertise is something which will take a lot of time to create. But even when we say familiar with the issues relating to sexual harassment, we have to understand a little more deeply that sexual harassment issues relating to women at home or on streets are very different from sexual harassment incidents that happen to a woman in a workplace scenario. The level of sophistication or the garb that sexual harassment incident and actions take in a workplace scenarios require a very different kind of understanding when you sit as an external member or as an internal committee member. And that is what this law is saying, right? And when we read the text, when we read different sections of the law, this judgment, like many more that we have been studying, just only tell you that the intent is something that cannot be written in the words, but you have to keep going back to understanding that why even have an independent external member if they are going to act and think and have the same association as other internal members of the organization. So yes, I think there are more cases like this around. Maybe we will take them up in the next session that we will schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of cases regarding external member and even conflict of interest between committees. Maybe we can do that in the next session. One of the famous ones is, of course, US Verma, which we just saw, in which there was about external members. Independence and objectivity has to be completely insulated so as to not get influenced by the employers. So these few cases are the ones which talk about a lot of importance, lay a lot of importance on this external member and the fact that there should be no conflict of interest. So there are a lot. Maybe we'll definitely take them up next time. Let's move on to the last case, which is there in our slide deck. This is regarding the principles of natural justice. Uh, what exactly is the principles of natural justice and where do they falter is something that we can take a look over here. So this is the case regarding Sardar Vallabhbhai National Institute of Technology versus Ranjit Roy and others of the High Court of Gujarat at Ahmedabad. This was decided in 2016. Now, a lot of girl students and other women employees of the institute filed complaints against certain associate professors of sexual harassment. And an IC was constituted to examine these complaints, and the IC asked these petitioners, these Ranjit Roy and everybody, to be present on a certain date to give their statement. In fact, there within like a few days only, we can see that the IC submission of the report was on 13th of February 2015, in which they found them to be guilty and recommended termination of employment. Pursuant, it gave it to the institute, and the institute in this report gave them show cause notices and why the action should not be taken against them. These associate professor, in fact, they said that the inquiry should have been asked for because they believe that the institute was a government institute, so it falls under the CPS-CCA rules, which are for the government servants. And they said that they cannot be terminated unless the procedure under Article 311 are followed. And the procedure that was followed by IC was not fair, not reasonable. They were never given an opportunity to properly present their stance, and was thus violative of Article 14 of the Constitution. However, none of these things were taken into account, and they were immediately terminated from services. The matter was challenged before High Court by these petitioners, by the associate professors, and it was allowed. And in fact, the appeal went before the DB by the institute. Now, what went wrong in this case is very important to note. These people were in fact only asked to be present and give their verbal submissions. It is undisputed that on such day they were asked to explain their conduct. Their verbal representations and denials were noticed, and the proceedings were thereafter adjourned. All of this is admitted in the case, and in fact, what also was admitted was that the copies of the complaints of the students were not supplied to the petitioners at all. There was no bipartite hearing. Whatever was the report that was prepared by the IC to give a show cause notice was just on the basis of the petitioner's oral submission and just to pass orders of dismissal. What the High Court held over here, they said that the procedure which was followed by the IC for drawing the report was completely violative of the principles of natural justice. The charges which were against these professors were not communicated to them in writing. A lot of complaints and all of the contents of the statements were not conveyed to them. They were never given any opportunity to collect material and make representations. Their oral responses were heard without reduced into writing. Nothing of what was given, even the complaints, was not shared to them. On all counts, the court held that the IC fell short of satisfying the requirement of natural justice. In fact, because of this issue itself, that they never got any proper opportunity to be heard, never got any proper opportunity to review any document, never got any proper opportunity to cross-examine anybody, the whole matter was sent back to the institute to actually form an IC and to carry it out as per the principles of natural justice. In fact, the decision of the High Court was so detailed. It said that the copy of the complainant has to be given. They have to be allowed to reply to such charge sheet. Cross-examination has to be allowed. They have to be allowed to lead evidence, and there has to be a fresh report by the institute. only after that will they be able to take any action. The institute can take any action. Because of this, what we can see is that principles of natural justice is right now in the POSH law. It forms part of our rules. It's Rule 7.4, which talks about the manner of inquiry into the complaint, and it just says that the complaint committee shall make inquiry into trade bracket formula to principles of natural justice. In fact, this was even spoken about in one of the Delhi High Court judgments, that principles of natural justice cannot be put into one bucket. It also has to depend upon every fact and circumstance of any case. And in many cases, there are confidentiality issues, so you may not be able, because of sensitivities, because of the age of the person against whom because of the age of the person who has filed a complaint, there could be issues regarding divulging of details. But a fair opportunity has to be given to all parties to be heard. Cross-examination, wherever possible, can be done face-to-face, or if there are judgments to even say that cross-examination can be done by giving questions in writing and taking responses in writing, where the IC facilitates this process. Any deposition given by any party should be without fear, without retaliation. There should be transparency of all submissions. If I have filed a complaint, it should be given to the respondent. Respondent's reply should be given back to me. There should be no bias, no presumption. There should be no misplaced sympathies. You cannot be presumed. You cannot be guilty unless presumed, unless proven. You have to be presumed innocent unless proven guilty. So these are the few things that we see are in principles of natural justice. Pallavi, what are your thoughts?
No, I think this is an aspect of POSH Act which needs a very deep dive in, right? Because let's just take one small thing as no bias, right, Suruchi? And we have seen that it's so immediate. I mean, the companies organize awareness and sensitization sessions for all employees, and training sessions are done for committee members. But a training on addressing the biases of individual internal committee members, including the external members, of course, right, is so crucial, because the gender stereotypes and other forms of stereotypes are so deeply ingrained in us that the first violation that happens on this law during any investigation proceeding is we immediately believe people if they are showing too many emotions, or there's this immediate bias that gets created towards the respondent, because the committee members have already in their head assumed and established that a complaint of such a grave degree, how can it happen, and the person may have not done it. And we have seen it in like very small instances that during a internal committee meeting, the complainant is being offered water, and a lot of emotional support is being extended towards them. They are being assured that everything will be all right, and they can take as many breaks in between as they find comfortable, and so on and so forth. And the tone is also different, and the emotional appeal element is also different. Whereas the same committee treats the respondent very differently, where they're not even offered water during the meeting. And if they're expressing any form of emotion, then it's immediately rejected as drama or as something fake. And what the committee members and external members, either external or internal, need to realize is that all these things are actually these small aspects of verbal and non-verbal communication are contributing towards violation of principles of natural justice, right? And another thing that committee members do most of the time is that they will not they try and play tricks that let us not disclose certain witnesses or evidences that we have received, and let's just see what the respondent has got to say, and that once again is a violation of principles of natural justice, because unlike any other court, here the parties get to represent themselves, and the only way they will be able to represent themselves is if they have access to complete and absolute information about the matter, right? And sometimes committee members do not even present all the witnesses which have been presented by the complainant, and they pick and choose who to meet and who not to meet. But the names of the witnesses need to be given to the respondent, so the respondent can pinpoint who they should actually be talking to. right? So the decision needs to incorporate the opinions and the views and statements of both the parties. Another thing committees do is they do not ask the respondent for a list of witnesses, that if they have not provided, then maybe there are no witnesses. Right? But we need to ensure, we need to understand that all these aspects are not covered during awareness session, which usually happen for a 1 hour or 45 minutes or 2 hours. Or in today's time, they're happening only through videos, wherein we don't even know if the individual members are watching everything that is being presented to them. And not everybody reads the policy. So it's also the duty of the committee members to educate the respective parties that these are your rights and you should be accessing them. And the refusal to access, or the denial that they do not want to access. Let's say I, as a respondent, I do not have any witness. Capture that from me instead of presuming that why do we need to present this thing, right?
Absolutely.
And there's so many things we can break down, the whole cross-examination and fair opportunity to be heard and so many things. But I do believe we should address a specific session just to look at how principles of natural justice are violated or are not followed in small, micro behavioral or, micro steps of an IC investigation. But for now, yeah, this is all that I have.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So this brings us to the end of discussion of all the cases. In fact, now we will open up the chat room and let's take questions, Pallavi.
Yes, actually, there was one person, I will just share. There was one question which was asked. Yeah, so the time where we were talking about, Suruchi, that once while an investigation is ongoing at the IC level, and the matter was taken to the High Court, and then they sent it back to the committee level. So Ketki had asked that what happens when another law could protect the interest of the perpetrator. Ketki, if you want to unmute yourself and speak the question, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just stop my screen share.
Yeah, what I wanted to say basically was that my experience has been that sometimes, the respondents could, despite being found sort of guilty or whatever by the committee, they could find themselves in a situation where, some labor laws protect their interest and they cannot be dismissed straight away or something like that, or they may not, you can't chuck them out of the premises where they are, and they continue to be present in the setting where they could perhaps harass the complainant again. So a situation like that could happen. So what I mean to say is that there could be, does this law and does it take precedence over another law? How does it work? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how this works. So if there is a right guaranteed as a worker, of a factory or whatever, to somebody, then can the fact that they are proven to have conducted to have sexually harassed somebody be taken into cognizance?
Absolutely. So I get your point. In fact, under the ID Act, there are certain protected workmen who cannot be terminated from services immediately, especially when there are proceedings going on against them. So in these cases, what the Act in fact allows you to do is, take certain interim measures to make sure that the complainant and the respondent in these cases are as far as possible for them. Change their departments or change their buildings if it is possible. Make sure that they're not reporting if there is a reporting line. If in case, send the complainant on leave, because the Act allows you to do that, to send her on 3 months leave, which is the entire duration of the investigation proceedings. So if a certain law protects the respondent, is what you're saying, from getting terminated, or from in fact, this question would come later on, right? From getting terminated. So even if they are still there in the organization, and even if the complainant still remains in the organization, try to keep them as far as possible as a part of your recommendations also in the employer's report, the one which you give it to the employer.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Raj, you had a question. I think a connected question with this.
Yes, just to clarify, me and Ketiki are both on the same IC. So so we have this issue constantly.
Yeah.
So we have so we have this. Actually, our organization basically workmen based. Workmen as in workmen under the ID Act.
ID Act, right?
Okay. So my basic question is this: Ketiki is our external member. I am part of the organization, part of the IC also. My question is this: the internal committee has found the complainant's charges proved. Okay, and they are very grave charges, and they have been proved. Now, we recommend a follow-up action to the employer, saying that you should do this or that, whatever our recommendation is. Now, does the employer have to go through the standing orders with another inquiry based on our inquiry, or can they take action directly against the workmen based on our recommendations? That is my basic question. Because dismissing a person, I mean, can we just suppose our intention or rather our recommendation is to dismiss the person or terminate the person? Can they do it without going through the required domestic inquiry as part of the standing orders?
Yeah. So in fact, Raj, there is a recent case law which said that if there are service rules which talk about disciplinary action, to be taken as per those rules, then even if the IC has found the person guilty, if the service rule requires that a termination on grounds of misconduct, which also includes sexual harassment, has to be done as per those rules, then the IC's report is taken as a preliminary report, sent to the disciplinary authority under those service rules or standing orders, and then is the action taken against the certain employee who has been found guilty of misconduct. Because in that case, there will be a dual procedure. Once the IC completes its procedure, and once the disciplinary authority under those service rules or standing orders, if there is a specific thing over there, if they relate to that, then the procedure will be taken as show cause notice will be basically issued as to why you shouldn't be dismissed.
Okay, thank you. That really clarifies everything. Can you just tell me the name of the case which said about these service rules?
Yeah, this is in fact Central University of Kerala case, which is quite recent. You will also find on our blog, we have done like a judgment update of that case. So if you can also visit our blog, you'll find the details of that case. It's Central University of Kerala case.
Okay, thank you. That completes my question. Thank you so much.
Any other question that anyone would like to ask about the judgments that we have covered today? Okay, then I think we are pretty much on time. It's important that we start on time and then we complete things on time for everyone to be able to manage the rest of their schedule also. We just want to thank everyone once again for being part of this very enriching session. Legal judgments always get very tedious. There is no way to make studying of legal judgment fun. There is no way to find a shortcut through these things. It requires a very deep dive into each and every aspect. We struggled at our end before we were organizing these sessions, just to make sure that is there any way that we can actually make it fun for everybody to be part of, but there is no way. Internally as a team we realize that. So thank you for everyone. We do believe that all of you in your respective profiles are somehow in one way or the other pursuing the profession, which is being a posh practitioner, either as young as a law student or as senior as somebody who is already looking and advising committees. And the learning will never stop. We have been part of so many cases so far. We have been, I think almost more than 400 cases have been underseen by us. The number of sessions, we can't even imagine the number of sessions that we have looked at. And the only thing that we can do to give back is to make sure that whatever we are learning on a day-to-day basis in a comprehensive manner, we can present it to the community also. And the industry that exist, of the professional network that exists, which advises companies can stay on top of the game, on top of everything that is coming out of the courts as well as coming out of the live practices also. In detail, we do run a 3-month-long certificate program. Like I said in the beginning also, we will not sell that to you. If you want to know about it, we're very happy to share it, and it's there on our website. But before we conclude, I just want to share one more thing. We will be continuing this series of legal judgment sessions in weeks to come, because the number of judgments that have come up and the kind of learnings that you can get as we dig through the different aspects of each and every judgment is actually quite difficult to capture in one session alone. And as I said, it's part of continuous growing. Second thing, all the judgments that we have been covering in their written format are available on our blog. I'm very happy to send it across. We will be sending an email to all of you with a link to this video so that you can refer back to any of the conversation. And second, you will have details of our website also. So that's it from our end. We wish all of you a safe and productive weekend. And yes, that's about it. Suruchi, anything from you?
No, that's it. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking out this time today. And yes, definitely, we hope to continue these sessions. Please join us whenever we organize them. Learning from us also, whenever you ask these questions, we also clarify our thoughts even further. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Closing in.
Thank you.